Welcome back to Business Week on Arise News. Nearly 350 innovators are digitizing health supply chains across the African continent and are headquartered across 27 African countries with a concentration in Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt. That's according to the annual market intelligence report by Salient Advisory titled Innovations in Health Product Distribution in Africa and funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Meanwhile, supply chain innovators in health across the continent have raised $2.6 billion in external funding since their founding, 93% of which have been in the form of equity investment. Based in Kenya, Juddy Gitahi spearheads Salient's market intelligence efforts in East Africa, tracking the emergence of health tech companies across the region. She holds a master's in social innovation and entrepreneurship from the London School of Economics and a Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Nairobi. She's joining me now to unpack the exciting developments in this highly impactful and, dare say, much needed space. And of course, Dr. Ola Brown will be with me in the studio as well to offer some insights. Thanks for joining us from Nairobi, Juddy. Great to have you on the show this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I'd like to start with asking you what the most significant trends you have noticed from the research and work that has been done in this report.
Absolutely. And so key among the interesting trends has been what you talked about, the landscape. So interestingly, we've seen a lot of changes. So from last year, our report highlighted 83 companies that are innovating to digitize health supply chains. However, this year we are looking at 350 companies. So there has been quite a significant shift. But last year we looked at only 4 countries and specifically innovations that are digitizing health products, so medicines in this case. However, when we expanded our scope as well as our geographical scale to now cover the first, to provide the first Pan-African landscape or description of these health innovations, we saw quite an interesting perspective on that end. And interestingly, as we said, there is a high concentration in Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, as well as Egypt, where 60% of these 350 companies are headquartered. However, there are only 12% of the companies are headquartered in Francophone countries. And an interesting trend that we have also seen is regards to partnerships. So we have seen quite an increase in the number of partnerships that are formed between government as well as innovators. And so that has been quite encouraging because the innovators have increased access to market as well as they are able to contribute to the issues on advancing access to care in their countries. Mm-hmm. And of course, we see that governments are able to contribute as well and are able to settle or sort some of the issues regarding the fragmentation of the health supply chains, as well as the issue of substandard health products that have entered into the market. And so there has been an interesting trend regarding the funding. As you've mentioned, we see 2.6 billion in this particular space. Also on gender, we see that, it's quite interesting because there is quite a low representation of women founders, according to our research.
Yeah, thank you for that exposition on the trend. So a lot of our viewers are probably wondering what exactly the products that are being distributed. What is a health supply chain? Is it just pharmaceuticals? Is it equipment? What are there services involved, consultation services? What exactly is a health tech supply chain?
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting. As I said last year, we were mostly focusing on innovations that are digitizing health products. So that is medicines, which most people understand. However, when we talk about health supply chains, it's quite a wide spectrum. So we look at this across 5 categories. So one is innovations that are digitizing direct distribution to consumers. So this includes online pharmacies, e-commerce companies, as well as telemedicine paired with product distribution. So that means that for someone who is at home and they want to buy medicines, they can easily go to their phones and locate the medicine that they want through the pharmacy that they want. So that's one of the categories that we tend to look at. The other one, we call it order and inventory management. So these are innovators that are helping pharmacies, clinics, as well as hospitals to purchase these health products, health consumables, as well as devices. And so they also help these clinics and hospitals to manage their inventory by understanding what are their stock levels, when do we purchase new commodities, which commodities are actually expiring. The third category that we look at are called the transport and warehousing, as well as reverse logistics. And this includes companies that are using tech methods to distribute health products. And interestingly, they include companies such as drone delivery companies. We see big names such as Zipline, which has worked across 6 African countries to help especially advance vaccines in countries such as Ghana, for example. The fourth category we look at is called protection and product visibility. And so this includes innovators that are helping to advance protection of the supply chain through the enabling counterfeit detection services, as well as track and trace services. And lastly, we talk about data analytics, and these are companies that are helping to the innovators as well as manufacturers and stakeholders in this ecosystem to understand what are the consumer patterns, what are the demand patterns, when should companies or even countries be able to engage in demand planning. So it's quite an interesting and a diverse array of these health supply chains, from end to end. Yeah,
thank you for that, Judy. Really great insights. So, Dr. Ola, I have to ask you, you've heard the plethora of services that are being provided by this health care technology and innovation companies, but they seem to be under the radar. They're not getting as much funding as they should be getting. So where exactly is this disconnect? They seem so central to our healthcare infrastructure across the continent.
So my company invests in health tech and fintech. If you look at global trends, fintech is probably the most funded area of the technology ecosystem. So 1 in 5 unicorns in the world is fintech. And if you look at health tech, it's probably about number 3 or number 4, depending on what study you look at. Now, because it's, I guess, a big part of my world, 50% of our portfolio are in health tech. I actually see them as quite big names. But some of the underlying reasons why I think that, I guess, again, policymakers should pay more attention to health tech and healthcare innovations is because healthcare doesn't just make the healthcare in a country better, it also makes the economy better. So if you look at the big states in America, for instance, you see that the biggest employers are either healthcare or education. If you look at the biggest employers of the world, the UK NHS is actually the 6th biggest employer in the world, the first largest employer in the whole of Europe. So people don't really make the connection between healthcare and good healthcare services and actually how many jobs the healthcare industry actually provides. And if you look at even the billionaire list, the Forbes billionaire list, you'd see that probably, depending on the year, 30 to 40% of the billionaires created are in the healthcare industry. So healthcare is not just good healthcare, it's good business and also contributes significantly to the economy. So I'd love to see more healthcare-focused policy going forward in Nigeria and in the rest of the Big Four, because we invest in Big Four countries. So we invest in health tech in Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, and South Africa. And I'd love to see more policy focus on making sure that the fundamentals for a good healthcare system are there so that the health tech innovators can build on top of that.
Yeah, Judy, you heard that Dr. Ola talking about the centrality of healthcare to not just the business world and the environment, but the economy as a whole. So I want to understand, how governments can partner successfully with these health tech innovators to actually really scale the solutions and make an even deeper impact across the continent. What are your thoughts on the partnerships?
Seen that there is a groundswell of interest among governments to partner with innovators, and this is because, as mentioned earlier, they have seen that these health supply chains have been quite fragmented, and also the influx of the substandard products. So they are aware of those issues, and they also know that they may not be very innovative to be able to contribute to these solutions. And therefore, that promotes their interest to work with innovators, because these innovators are at the forefront of advancing innovations that actually can solve the issues that governments are having. And so we've seen quite an interesting array in that end. And so, for example, I could talk to a case of Zipline, as mentioned. So they use drone delivery services, and they're able to especially provide products in the remote areas where, perhaps vehicles or other modes of transport may not be able to reach quite fast. And also because, when we talk about medicines, we are talking about emergency cases. So, the issue of health commodity products, these are such as blood, such as advanced or immediate emergency medicines. So they are required within a specific timeline. And so using the traditional modes of transport may not be able to meet the need at the right time. And therefore, we've seen governments, as mentioned in Rwanda, in Nigeria, in Kenya, they have been uptaking this solution and really helping their systems or rather the public facilities to be able to serve these communities that are in these remote areas. Also, when we talk about the issue of order and inventory management, or enabling the hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies to procure medicines, as well as to track these medicines in terms of the stock levels, of the inventory levels of these medicines, governments have been very interested in partaking these solutions. Actually, about 14 innovators are working with governments to be able to provide these services to these governments. And therefore, then the government, for example, in Kenya, we have 3 county governments that are working with a company called Maisha Meds to enable their inventory management. And therefore, the county is able to understand, when they purchase products, which health products or which medicines, for example, are about to expire. When should they start disposing of these medicines? And this avoids the issue of, people or consumers actually having to consume medicines that are expired. And so it actually goes back to the benefits that the normal consumer is having, such that their life is actually quite safe, and they are giving quality products.
Yeah, interesting. There was another finding in the report that said companies founded solely by women appear to be more reliant on grant and debt funding compared to companies solely founded by men. Now, if we even take it away from the gender question, it seems like certain sectors get more publicity from grant-making organizations. And so it tends, some would argue, it fuels this perception that they're not viable. Whereas we heard what Ola said, many of the billionaires on the top global list are actually healthcare entrepreneurs. So what are your thoughts on why maybe the healthcare sector has historically attracted more grant and grant type funding from NGOs and development organizations, and what is accounting for the reason why it's heavily skewed, that grant funding is heavily skewed more towards female-owned businesses?
Absolutely. I mean, you made a statement, and it's not that, women are getting grants because their businesses are not viable. However, it's because there is a fundamental inequality in the access of financing by women innovators. So looking at the demographics, we see that out of the 348 innovators that we have tracked, only 8% of them are solely founded by women. And so when we look at the funding distribution, we see that men are receiving 91% of the equity, that is the 2.6 billion, whereas women are only receiving 2% of this. So there is an extreme fundamental inequality in access to funding by women, and this has resulted to the issues of grants as well as debt being more accessible by women. And therefore, these other streams of income have come up to actually now support the women and to perhaps equalize this ecosystem that is heavily skewed. And so what happens is that now women have easy access to these grants, and therefore they are able to grow their businesses to a point where then they can be able to perhaps even compete with those of men. And also when we look at the dynamics of these challenges that women are facing, we actually had a focus group discussion with women to understand, what are the challenges that they are facing. And we talked to chief executives across different countries. We also talked in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Gabon. We talked to ecosystem players, and we talked to also accelerators programs. And so the women talked about the issue of unequal access to funding. They talked about the fact that they are not in the same networking opportunities, or they are lacking these networking opportunities that men have. And also there is a regulatory or policy issue, as well as the fact that women are perceived to be more risky. So when women are going to fundraise, they are actually asked questions about, how are they going to mitigate risks? Whereas when men are, funding or presenting their pitches, they ask about opportunity. So there is that fundamental problem that is there, and so grants are actually very important to curtailing this problem.
Yeah, and it's not even a sort of one track, because grants can actually help unlock other types of funding. Dr. Olabran, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this gender disparity in the funding balance.
Somebody once told me that women are judged on what they've done, whereas men are judged on what they say they're going to do. And that's a big difference between equity and debt funding. When we're talking about the US Treasury, I was saying that I applied for a loan facility, and I had to show that I had some kind of collateral, and I had to back it up with my cash flows. And that's the kind of thing that women have to do. They're being asked for their financials, they're being asked for collateral to secure the debt. Whereas equity is more about, when you invest equity in someone, you're believing what they're going to do, you're believing their story. So I think that in terms of being able to tell a story and being able to say, this is what I'm going to do, men are more successful at being able to tell a great story, whereas women really have to show their workings. And that's why they're more, you can see from the statistics that actually women are more likely to access debt, whereas men are more likely to just be able to tell a great story and get funding without the associated sort of collaterals and cash flow statements and all of the other things required. So I think that in terms of the disparity, as somebody that invests in this space, in our portfolio, actually, in healthcare portfolio, we have 50% women founders. But you would very rarely see that in an equity portfolio because of this disparity. And I think that one of the interesting points that you made actually was around networking opportunities and being able to connect with investors. And I think that that's something from a policy perspective, but also from the venture capital ecosystem itself, that we should make a bit more effort in doing. So because healthcare is very, very central, like I said, to creating jobs and the economy. And if we can get some of the key innovators, this more patient capital, and don't forget, debt is, your bank is not going to come and ask you, is not going to call you with clients usually. Typically, when you get debt funding, it's actually quite separate, as in terms of the bank isn't providing you with board members, they're not providing you with advice, they're not providing you with business development, they're not helping you raise additional funding. But when you get equity funding, you get a lot of benefits that come with equity funding. So you get checking calls, you get business development support, you get marketing support, you get support raising your next round of funding. So getting equity into the hands of women is really, really important, because it's quite different from the more isolated, detached nature of debt.
Yeah. And Judy, I just have one more question for you with a required one answer, which is, what is the one key recommendation for innovators and stakeholders from this report? We've run out of time. You have just about 1 minute, sorry, to answer that.
Well, a key recommendation for innovators is that we see that these innovators can be supported to especially work with governments, because you see governments are ready to engage with innovators. Then having capacity building programs that teach innovators how to work with governments, this will enable to help them increase these partnerships. And also for global health agencies as well as for donors, we see that, and we say that they can be able to participate in these government partnerships by investing in them, and also by leveraging these grants to help the women founders especially come up in the ecosystems.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juddy Gitahi, Senior Consultant at Salient Advisory, joining us from Nairobi, and of course, Dr. Olabran, our resident analyst and medical doctor and PhD holder. Thanks for joining us today.